Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, we're going to talk numbers today because we are simplifying how to manage your cash flow. And we're going to take it from the angle, obviously, of if you are a small business owner. Now, I will say this as a caveat. If you don't own a business or you're not quite there yet and you want to own a business, I certainly believe the things that we're going to talk about today could be applicable in your personal budgets as well. So don't bounce quite yet. This could be for you. My special guest today, his name is Stephen King. Not that one, but another one. From startup to working with Fortune 500 executives, Stephen King brings a unique combination of vision, foresight, and experience to help small businesses run better, grow faster, and make more money. He's regarded as one of the accounting's industry top thought leaders, and he's currently serving as the president and CEO of Growthforce, one of the nation's largest cloud-based accounting services. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Stephen King. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, Mary. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here, and I want to talk all things numbers. And while some people might be like, oh God, this is going to be a dry one, I kind of like budgets. I like talking about numbers. I like tapping into that left side of our brains a little bit. I'm sure you do as well, right?
Especially when you're talking about cash, right? Because everybody needs help with getting more cash.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so let's start off first things first. Define what cash flow means to you as it relates to running a small business. What is it and what is it not?
So cash flow is about timing. It's about the timing of when money flows into the company, any sources of funds, and the timing of when it's got to go out, the uses of funds. Mm-hmm. And what it's not is profits. It's not profits is how much you charge someone, and the excess of that over how much it costs you to deliver your services or sell them a product. And that has nothing to do with timing. Cash flow is about when you get paid and when you have to pay.
Mm-hmm. So let's just break it down. Make an example. So if you are, let's say, a wedding photographer, right? You get a deposit down when you sign the contract. The wedding might be 6 or 8 months away from that point. You might get some payments, maybe 1 or 2 beforehand, and then a final payment either the day of the wedding or the day you deliver the photographs to the client. So talk to us about cash flow in that regard, because, those kinds of businesses, their client work is, so far out from the point where they sign the contract versus, say, somebody who sells muffins and you buy a muffin, you get the muffin, you get the cash, right? In the beginning, is there some differences between cash flow between business A and business B?
Yeah. So first off, the most important tool in dealing with improving cash flow is your cash flow forecast. Mm-hmm. So we typically recommend 13 weeks. And why? Because you need to see a problem about 1 quarter in advance in order to have enough time to deal with it. And that's where people get into trouble when there's a surprise. It's like, oh crap, we can't make payroll or we can't pay our rent. And now all of a sudden you're in a downward spiral.
Right.
The photographer is a great example. In fact, I've got an ebook, 21 Ways to Improve Cash Flow, and I show a cash flow forecast with an example of just like you described, where you get the deposit up front, and now all of a sudden you've got a source, you got money in the bank. Many times if you're paying a commission to someone, you pay it based on the cash that's received. So if that's the case, a photographer probably doesn't have that, but a larger company, we deal with companies that are 2 to 20 million in revenue.
Right.
But the same thing applies. You then have to match that timing of when you're going to pay that money out. So there's going to be some supplies. The reason you got a 50% deposit up front was because you got to go out and buy some stuff, right? Props and maybe film or whatever the materials are that you need to earn the income. And you plug that in based on the timing of when that's going to flow out, the use of cash. And a cash flow forecast allows you to say, okay, let's just use a round number. It's a $1,000 job. You got $500 up front. If you have to spend $600 before you get to the job, you got negative cash flow.
Right.
And if you only have to spend 300, now you're able to use some of that free cash to be able to pay for your rent and your employees or whatever it is that you need to run the business.
Right. Because a photographer needs to hire a second shooter to be on site at the wedding to shoot. And like you said, maybe they need a special lens because they know there's a certain shot that they need or don't need. Yeah. So why 13 weeks though? Is there a magic to that particular number for you?
Yeah, it's when you see a problem in advance, far enough in advance, that you can then work backwards and say, all right, what do I do about this?
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases, a lot of businesses will look to see if it's a big enough of a problem and it's temporary and they've had to hire some new people, open a new plant, or just make some investments ahead of when they're going to actually generate revenue from that new camera.
Mm-hmm.
13 weeks is enough time for you to go to the bank and get a bank loan, or see if you're interested in selling some equity to be able to get some investors to come in and take some equity in exchange for future profits. And when you've got 6 or 8 weeks out, you're really kind of limited to the tactical issues. Mm-hmm. But the single biggest reason why you want 13 weeks is it's a mindset. Cash flow really starts with your relationship with cash.
Yeah.
And, it's typically the way your parents' relationship with cash. Were they frugal? Did they have a mindset of abundance? Were they afraid? Did they ever talk about it with you? Or were you just taught, don't discuss how money? And you bring that into our adulthood. And I often find that it's the insecurities around dealing with cash and money that cause people to not take the right steps that they need in order to be successful. So for me, it's getting the right mindset, one of abundance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not just putting it out there, the secret, right? I believe strongly in putting it out there to the universe and it will happen. But really, seeing 13 weeks allows you to deal with reality.
Yeah.
I have a client in New York, Ryan. He's a construction business, and when COVID hit and New York City shut down, we're in Kingwood, Texas. So, we were 3 months behind New York, but he was the first client that we called up and said, what do you need? He's like, I can't even figure out where to start. We just lost all our business. Everything shut down. Now what? And we said, well, let's get you a cash flow forecast. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to him a couple of days later after the senior sent him the cash flow forecast. He said, you have no idea how much of an impact that's meant to me and my wife, because the sky isn't falling. Mm-hmm. I can see cash flow is about timing. So even though he didn't have any work, he had customers that owed him money, and the timing was 30 to 60 days later, which is really slow, by the way. Mm-hmm. But now he had this reserve of cash that allowed him to sleep at night because he knew, I'm not going to go out of business in 90 days. Mm-hmm. And that's why the 13 weeks is so important, because you need that much time to actually do something about it.
And I can imagine also, at least in non-COVID times, you could at least map out a whole year ahead and think about where your busy season is and when your slow season is. And, in the case of the wedding photographer, busy season may mean two things. One, when do people book their wedding photographer? Right after Christmas when there's engagement season, or right after Valentine's Day. It's like from December 25th through till the end of February is when wedding vendors get booked the most, especially the planner, the venue, the wedding photographer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's their busy season for executing the events. The events themselves, depending on where they are in the world or what the weather is in California, might be from September to November or March to May. So is it true to think about cash flow forecasting as in when the money is dropping, like as in the sale, and then also when the money is leaving when the event executes, because he or she has to hire, extra staff to execute the actual event, or a bit of both?
It's the sources. It's again, so to restate it, the cash flow is about the timing of the flow of cash, the flow of cash in
Yep.
as a source. So the customer pays you the deposit, they pay you the final payment. What is the timing of that? And then what is the timing of the flow of the money out when you have to hire the people and you have to pay for the supplies? And it's matching that up that is the key to success. And really, it's also that mindset. Step one is the mindset is also being proactive about wanting to have that information, not having a fear of, oh my God, I don't want to look at it because what if it's bad? And that's what most failures come from, is letting your fears drive your behaviors. And so look at that. If you are fearful of dealing with cash flow, get your accountant to give you a 13-week tool, and that'll actually surprisingly helps relieve the fears, because now you can say, okay, I can deal with something that I know about.
It certainly does. I mean, for me, when I look at my cash flow forecast and I go, oh, look, things are really, really tight in, say, June. Do I need to run an extra marketing campaign, a sales campaign that exact time to boost a little cash to come into the business, when things are a little bit more lean? So let's talk about some other practical ways to manage our cash flowing into us, and what ways can we improve it?
Well, there's one very important and simple way to solve cash flow problems, is to understand why do cash flow problems begin in the first place. It's not because of billing or collections procedures in the accounting department that causes cash flow problems. Yes, small percentage of businesses who don't do the basic blocking and tackling will suffer because they don't get their bills out, or they don't hound their clients and make sure they get paid. But that's not the primary reason. The primary reason that businesses have cash flow problems is because they're not pricing their jobs or their clients or their services or products to provide enough profit, gross profit, to cover overhead and still then generate whatever your target net income is. So if you want to make, I'm going to use round numbers. If you're $1 million business and you want to make 10% profit, that's $100,000 in your pocket after paying your salary and all the expenses, and you do 100 jobs, that means for each $1,000 job you've got, there's there's $100 of profit in there, 10%. And what happens is the mindset that people have is, I can sell my way to profits. If I just get more business, I'll be more profitable. When in fact, that's often that causes you to have less profits and therefore worse cash flow. Because if you're not pricing that job right, if you're discounting your services, then all that discount comes out of your profits.
Yes.
Your costs don't change. Your overhead doesn't change. The price you pay to your people doesn't change. The only thing that changes is how much is left when the job is done.
Right.
And what I see people not understanding is, when they're doing their pricing, understanding that we call it unit economics, right? Which is just a fancy phrase for the profit and loss on the work that you do. A unit is whatever you put on an invoice. So if the invoice for a photographer is the Trish and Steve King wedding, okay, that's a unit. It's a job. It's a customer. Whatever you want to call it, that's what you want to look at, the profitability of that job, that customer, that unit. And if you know in advance, okay, I want to be $1 million business making 10% profit, my average job blended over the course of the year has to be about $1,000, and I need $100 of it for profit. When the customer comes in and says, listen, I'm looking at 2 other photographers and I really like you, but they're charging me $900. Can we work out a deal? And if you don't have that feeling of abundance, if you have that feeling of scarcity, you're like, yeah, I'll work with you. Yeah, sure. I want you as a client. I like you too. We did the thing. That's what causes cash flow problems.
Right.
And I watch, the smaller the business, the harder it is. You have to stick to your guns. That when somebody says you want that discount, you have to then start to switch into sales mode and say, Why are you different? What's your differentiator? It's like, you know what? I know there's other photographers out there, and I know they're cheaper than us, but what you wanted was, and you explain what their value is, and you say, I'm worth it because I can deliver this, and you're only going to do it once. Is it worth risking that for $100? Nobody's going to say no. It's just a negotiation. They're not talking to anybody else. They're busy. They're just doing it because that's what we think we're supposed to do.
Right.
And the successful businesses understand, I need $100 of profit on 1,000 jobs to take home $100,000 at the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And, for me, when I advise my clients, it's the same thing. It's figuring out how to productize your service-based business. And so if somebody does say, well, my cap is 900, then you go, okay, great. Well, let's figure out what we can shave off of the deliverables of what you're getting. So you're not still delivering them an unlimited amount of your time and services. You're saying, okay, well, that was a 10-hour job, and now this is a 8-hour job because we've, eliminated this. Obviously, these are not the real numbers. Wedding photographers get paid $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for a job, but just using round numbers here, for example. Yes, so productize your business and figure out what can be taken out. And I think that is also a really strong negotiation tool, because if you're dealing in, emotions with a client,
Yes.
They go, ooh, I don't want to remove that.
No.
Actually, I do see the value in your price, and I want to keep that in because that is important, just as you said, right?
And the other thing, there's some exceptions to this rule, right? So I'll come back to that, in a second. But the other thing is really to understand that it's not the top line that matters, it's the bottom line. So a lot of business owners will say to me, it's like, well, listen, if instead of making a 50% profit margin, isn't it better that I make a 33? It's better than zero, right? Shouldn't I give that discount and take that deal? I said, well, it depends. It depends on, do you have a limited capacity to make money, meaning you only have so many hours in a day, you only have so many employees? Then if you don't make it on every day or every hour or on every employee, you can't make it up in volume. So you're going to have to give up your profit targets. And, we're dealing with larger businesses, but, I just advised an audiovisual company in Colorado and said, you're much better off being a $5 million business making 20% to the bottom line than where you are right now, which is a $7 million business making 5% to the bottom line.
Right.
And so don't focus on how much revenue you're bringing in, focus on how much profit. And the way you do that, if you have to look at one number every month, you look at gross profit percentage.
Okay.
Not gross profit dollars, gross profit percentage.
And how do they get to that number?
It's the revenue that you earned minus your cost to deliver that service, the cost of goods sold, or your COGS. So your revenue minus your COGS. And there's only two things in COGS, cost of goods sold. It's the direct labor, the labor that you paid to directly earn the income. It's what the customer directly paid for. That's why it's called direct labor. And direct materials, the stuff that you had to buy to earn the income. That goes above the line. And the line is gross profit. So what does it mean when you say above the line? Well, these are the costs that when you hit revenue minus these above the line costs, now I can see the gross profit, which is the profit on the work that you did. Everything else is below the line. It's overhead. It's not directly what the customer paid for. These are your indirect costs, your rent, your supplies, your accountants, your HR. The executive director's salary is not what the customer is paying for. And by seeing the gross profit and seeing it as a percentage, you can figure out, am I pricing my jobs right? Am I generating enough gross profit for each customer to cover its share of the overhead and still have 10% left over? So when you look at that unit economics, the profit per job, you're going to look at how much profit do I want to make? $100 per job to make $100,000. If I have $300,000 in overhead, I have $300 of overhead. on each job.
Right.
So my profit margin has to be at least 40% to cover 10% profit and 30% overhead. And now you can make a data-driven decision about pricing. You can look and see, okay, if I give a discount of 10%, I am going to cover my overhead, but I'm not going to make $100,000 unless I make it up somewhere else.
Right, right. And this is the dance, I think. I mean, I've been in business for 18 years now, and I think I've learned a lot over time in this dance. There are some clients that you take because you believe that the pictures, portfolio, the ability to say, well, hey, I've worked with so-and-so client will help and generate future bigger client jobs, right? And so you take that as a educated risk and an educated guess that will help you build your business. What I think you're saying here, Stephen, is to not make decisions like that without any data at all. Like, well, I'll just give everybody a discount. Like it's, willy-nilly and all that. And that's how businesses run out of cash, right? Like that's bottom line what kills most businesses, big or small.
That is exactly right, Mary. You hit it right on the head, because what a lot of smaller business owners do is they'll make decisions based on their gut.
Mm-hmm.
And you need your gut. Your gut is what got you here. I'm not suggesting at all I have Spider-Man on my desk as a gift from my staff, because I would always say, my spidey sense says this is not a person who's going to fit our team, or this is not going to be a good client. So you can't ignore the spidey sense, but you have to look at the data to tell you if your gut is right. Mm-hmm. We sometimes you will take a client and give that 10% discount because you do have excess capacity.
Yeah.
Right? You do have hours that you're paying for that you're not getting paid for. And so in those situations, or if you're trying to keep a competitor out and you long-term, the lifetime value of the customer is worth it to give a 6-month spiff, or a million of other reasons, but you want to make it on data. Mm-hmm. And you just, by looking at that unit economics, what's the profit per unit? And I suggest, I do a lot of reading. Profits First is a book that outlines this step by step. And you calculate the profit on each job, on each unit. Yes. And then when you make those decisions, if I give up that now, it's going to come out of my profits first.
Yeah. Well, side note, anybody that's listening to this episode, you can find all the links to the resources that Stephen shares over at the show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com. That is an excellent book. And it really does flip the script in how you think about your money in and money out. So I want to rattle off just quick fire some other ways that we can manage and improve our cash flow. So you and I talked offline about kind of pay slowly rules, managing our interest rates on credit cards, and obviously debt collection. Can you give us a little bit of insight into those three things?
Yeah. So first, the basics of cash flow management starts with having the data. Right? Mm-hmm. If you know what your cash flow needs are, then you can be vigilant about it, right? So the first thing what we suggest is after the cash flow forecast, because that's number one, you want to make sure that on your billing that you have terms in there that are clarified to the client that what happens if they're late. Mm-hmm. Because cash flow is about timing. So the first thing you want to do is when you finish the work, you want to make sure that you're very clear when is the balance due. And if they're going to be late, what is the cost to them? We recommend 1.5% per month of a late fee charge, 18% annually. And why is that? Because especially if you're dealing with a larger company, there's somebody at the other side of the bill payment process whose job it is to pay you slowly.
Yes. Yeah.
And how do you avoid that? You have a late payment penalty because they're going to pay more cash if they're paying you interest. And so the second thing is to make sure that you don't let your clients' cash flow problems become your cash flow problems. You have to turn away business if you don't think they can pay you. You're allowed to run credit checks and background checks. And, if it's a big enough of a deal, your accounts receivable, which is the amount that people owe you because for the work you did, is a bank loan. Mm-hmm. And so get a written credit policy. And then I was an Inc. 500 speaker for a couple of years, and I did a macro study of cash flow best practices at the Fortune 1000. And the single best thing I found was, before you start doing any work, walk through with your client exactly how you get paid. Mm-hmm. And specifically, the person who pays the bills, who approves the check, who signs the check, what kind of supporting documentation are they going to need? So that if you can anticipate there's especially large companies, can I email you the receipts? If I send you a bill on the first of the month, and you should bill weekly, by the way. Too many people bill monthly. That's a mistake. You're losing 3 weeks, right? For the work that got done in the first week.
Yeah.
And when you cash that out for a whole year, that's 36 weeks. It's a big difference. But if you understand, I'm going to bill you on the first. Who do I send that to? Who do they have to get approval from? How long is it going to take to cut a check so I can get a commitment from you that I will get paid on the 15th or the 20th?
Yes.
Now you can plug that into your cash flow forecast. And you want to do that before you start the work, because that's when they love you the most, right after they sign the contract.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I have had experience working with very, very large companies where, you're getting to the PO system, and that may take 90 days to get approval into their very stoic, old-fashioned kind of accounting system. And so if you're a small business owner that's just not used to that, you're used to people Venmoing you money on a dime, like when you start to work with larger corporates, you really do have to be smart about this and go, okay, well, this is a big job and I want to have this client on the books, but if it doesn't work out financially, you've got to make sure to ask the hard questions. A lot of times what I found with that in particular is there's a threshold where it's like, well, we could pay on a company credit card up to $5,000 immediately without pre-approval in the PO system. It's like, well, great, we will be billing you $4,999, as part of our billing system. So you ask the questions.
You just add the 2.5% to 3.5% into your cost.
Yes.
And I agree with you, Mary. It's a great investment, especially for large amounts, because you also shift. Not only do you eliminate the accounting cost of having somebody to pick up the phone, mm-hmm. and that's expensive. Yes. It's a hidden cost of business that you eliminate. But you shift all the risk to the credit card company. If for whatever reason, we're going into uncertain times here in May 2022. If your client suddenly isn't around, that's American Express's problem.
Yes.
Talk about collections there. I think one of the things that I have found, the next big area on improving cash flow is, and there's a lot, and it's in our whole ebook, 15 ways to improve cash flow. The problem usually is the person doing the collections doesn't know how to do it. It's usually the project manager who did the work. Now you're dealing with their insecurities and their relationship with money. Right. And that comes from their parents' insecurities and relationship with money.
So how do we do it better?
3 things, right? The first thing is, when you're picking up the phone, you have to be firm. There's 3 F's, right? Firm means you're not getting off that call until you get a commitment. Doesn't matter if it's a commitment to pay or a commitment to have another phone call about when they can commit to pay. You have to be able to count on a date certain.
Yep.
The second is be focused. And this is the single biggest lesson I got from that Inc. 500 presentation. The best run companies understand that when you're trying to separate somebody from their cash, they're going to tell you all the things that are wrong with your product and services. And so you turn the collections call into a customer service call, which is why I do not suggest that the project manager do the calls. Somebody in accounting should do the calls, because they're not going to be emotional. They're going to be emotionally distant. Oh, Mary, I'm really sorry that we did you didn't get the copies or the blueprints or the whatever. You hired us to do a wedding and you're still waiting for us to send you the negatives. Well, first, we don't send negatives, but what I can do is I can blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, if you are listening carefully to their concerns, number one, you're going to improve your service offering. Now you're going to explain what the deliverables are up front, right? But if you address their concerns immediately, it shows that you're serious about getting paid. I did what I said I was going to do, and I did it quickly, and now we need to get paid.
Yeah.
And then the third is be friendly. You get a lot more with honey. And if you come at it as a customer service call, as something that's trying to make this minimally stressful for the other person, it'll help them feel comfortable, and you'll get that payment. And because people buy from people. And if you're just like, you know what, I know I hate making these calls because, it's so hard for you. I know you want to pay us on time, but we have to I have to pay the photographer, and just let me know, how can we work on this, and just make it personal.
Yes.
And that's the simple way. Firm, focused, and friendly.
So if you're curious about what Stephen and his team do out in the world, they are working with clients, big and small, and helping to automate the collections process, the bookkeeping process, and accounting for businesses. You can check out his website over at growthforce.com. And again, go back to the show notes over at the simplifierspodcast.com, and that's where you can connect with him and his team through their various social media accounts. And we'll make sure to put a link in the show notes for that ebook as well, so people can connect and just take the first step into this. Because, sometimes it's a little bit scary if you don't have a accounting background or degree. But I think for me, I know when I can trust my CPA and my accounting team to help guide me along the way, it's transformative as a business owner. So I highly recommend checking them out and seeing what the work that they do in the world. So, Stephen, as we wrap up, I have a couple of questions I need to ask that we ask everybody that comes on the podcast. So here we go. Quick fire. One, tell us one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system.
And I have it on my desk. Simon Sinek, Start with Why.
Excellent book.
I go back to this just always to remember, why do we do what we do? And the simple message is people do not buy what you do.
Yes.
People do not buy what you do. People buy why you do it. So we help small businesses live that American dream to achieve those profit targets. We're not helping them just do bank reconciliations and payroll.
Yeah. A great book. I haven't read it in a long while, but it's an excellent recommendation. So we'll put that in the show notes for you guys as well. So tell me, Stephen, who's one person, somebody you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things out there in the world? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
Can I say my wife?
Sure.
She's just got a small yoga practice that is, in this really stressful times, helping people with breathing to deal with not just the day-to-day stresses of life, but through Vini Yoga, helping to deal with medical issues. And, if your central nervous system is relaxed, you're not going to have as much cancer and diabetes. So,
yeah. And what is your wife's name?
Trish King, Peaceful Breath Yoga.
Excellent. Well, we will link her up into the show notes as well, so people can check her work out and see her thing as well. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for being healthy. And I mean that mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, physically and spiritually healthy. I feel like I've never been happier. I told this to my leadership team at our retreat last week. And because I feel like we're making such a difference in our clients' lives. I talked to a client today exactly about what we just talked about. And we're going to talk again next week. And in the next 60 days, it's going to transform him and his wife's lives because he has to, and he has the data. So it feels really good to make a difference.
Yeah. And when you squash fear with knowledge, yes, one step at a time, you're peeling back that onion layer and you're going, oh, well, this isn't as scary as I once thought it was. And again, to your point, you can make educated, qualified decisions on risks and opportunities in the future. You'll feel so much more empowered. So, Stephen, my final question for you today is this. And again, thank you so much for your time. Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and they're going, yeah, I got some serious cash flow problems. I don't even know where to begin. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
Don't be afraid to increase your prices. Now is the easiest time, and I've been a CPA for 35 years. I've been through 7 recessions. And right now, because inflation is on the front page of every newspaper and every late night talk show, people are expecting costs to go up. The successful businesses are dealing with it now in May 2022, not in September, or definitely not by Christmas. Because you get ahead of this and you'll be fine.
Yes, agreed. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Mary.